Put it on? Yeah, I'll put it on. Even though I'm not gone, but I will be logged on shortly now. I've lost my cursor. I'm just with this. Well, it's because it's going on here.
Okay, I hope you're seeing what's in a name.
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, what's in a name? Just a few follow-ups from last week. McKinley, formerly Denali, Lisa Murkowski. Hey, it's been Denali for thousands of years. The Athabascan name, and we know Athabascans because the Navajo are Athabascans. They walked down from Alaska and arrived in the Southwest about the same time that the Spanish did. So Gulf of Mexico, the origin of the Gulf of Mexico, that came up. That was, in fact, Cortez in 15...
I gotta mute.
Okay.
Oh, I'm still not muted.
Sorry. Cortez 1519, but it was a guy named Pineda that sailed all around the Gulf and gave it its name. And this is the map that he drew, which was amazingly accurate, much more accurate than this map that Donald Trump drew that divides the Gulf of Mexico in half. And the derivation of the name Mexico, one of our pub members, in fact, Rudy's wife, asked, where did the name Mexico come from? It is in the native Aztecan language, which has this name, but we usually just say Aztecan. And it referred to the capital city, which they considered the navel of the moon, their city. A nice metaphor. But there's another possibility, which is less picturesque, and it's a more sober one, named after their god, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce. If anybody knows how to pronounce it, shout it out. He's this god of war is the patron god of Mexico, and his nickname is Mexi. So the place of Mexi is the land of the war god. So there's two different interpretations. I like the one of the navel of the moon better. But knowing the history, which we covered when Cortez landed, the war was typical of the Aztecs. They were a fascist war state. And a Jesuit, after speaking with Aztecs over almost a century, drew this to depict what his understanding of the war god was. So I just saw in today's New York Times, I thought I'd at least mention this. I think this may be an important article, and I'd really recommend if you have the times to look this up. It introduces the term sovereigntists into history. And the 1919 refers to the opposition to the League of Nations, which sovereigntists in the U.S. Senate were worried about. Interestingly, Trump may be more of an imperialist than a sovereigntist, but for those of us that are rooting for Ukraine, there's an interesting bit of news in this line that that Trump will make a deal with Ukraine if we get its rare metals. It is, and that's one reason why Putin invaded, was to get to the rare metals. So a ray of hope for Ukraine, maybe not for the right reasons, which the German chancellor didn't think was the right reason. And so anyway, sovereigntists, you might take a look at this article. It's interesting. And it's written by Jennifer Mittelstadt. And so Roy, she studies military history at Rutgers. And this is a view of the Panama Canal. That's so. Just to follow up, Homer and I were talking after last week, and he asked, "Well, what's the ethnicity of Greenland and the allegiances?" And interestingly, Greenland is 88% Inuit or Eskimo, and the Danish there are only around 7%. Interestingly, Filipinos are there as service people. So that's interesting. And it just led me to think the Inuits, when did they actually get there? They weren't the first people there. They were the Dorset people. But you can see the Inuits start to arrive around 1300. They're in blue, and the Norse people, the Vikings, are purple. They land in Iceland and stay there because Iceland is nice and warm with its thermal activity. And they stayed briefly in Greenland, but left. And the Inuits, the Thule people, what we call Eskimos, came and inhabited all the non-icy parts of the island and part of Canada. And interestingly, there was a period of global warming that lasted 300 years, so they could come further south in their new technology, which was dog sleds and kayaks. So that's how they got there. The Danish 7%, they're mostly expatriates. But I think anybody who really wants to be a multimillionaire should consider going to Greenland, because its future with global warming is interesting. And there's, of course, big power interests now. But migration's down, and it has been down over the last decade. So at any rate, somebody might say to young people, go north, young man, go north.
So, John, okay, good. You're getting to the point why I asked about the ethnicity, which is Greenlanders could vote to become independent and then determine if they wanted to be purchased.
Yeah.
I think it's very hard to predict how the Inuits will vote.
Well, yeah, and I don't know if voting is in the cards. I'm not sure that they've taken the initiative to do that yet, but we're going to see. But after our conversation, Homer, I have a few more questions. Well, wait a second. The Inuits are in other places besides Greenland. So what if the Inuits banded together and formed a country of their own? Alaska and Russia are off the table, but Greenland and Canada, they'd come up with 125,000 people. There's slightly more Inuits in Canada than there are in Greenland, but there are other Inuit organizations that cover people of the North all around the Arctic Circle. And I thought this was interesting to see all those organizations of people. But just looking at Greenland and Canada by itself, it's 125,000. And Iceland, they've only got 300,000, and they're a prosperous nation thanks to thermal energy that is quite near the surface in Iceland. But guess what? I said, well, if there's geothermal activity in Iceland, isn't there some in Greenland? And there is. Here are hot springs in Greenland. And couldn't they use it for geothermal potential? Well, it's a little bit deeper in Greenland, but it's not impossible. And also, NASA says that there's a lot of geothermal heat all the way under Greenland from the Earth's mantle, and it's melting the ice from below, of all things. So could Greenlanders drill deep to tap into this source of energy? And major challenges, but deep drilling may become viable as an energy source in the future. The geopolitical reality, the United States isn't leaving their sphere of influence. We've been in Alaska since 1868. We've been in Greenland since the Nazis took over Denmark, and we declared the Monroe Doctrine to keep them out. I mean, there were other things that would keep them out, but we used the Monroe Doctrine, which is still in effect, apparently. But Homer had a suggestion. How about NATO being an umbrella, a congenial umbrella for Greenlanders in America and Denmark and all of Europe, and so that would be nice. But Trump is, depending on the day of the week, skeptical of NATO. Okay, yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, actually, what's interesting, I've been the last couple of days, the National Geographic, I think I may even mentioned it last week, was National Geographic had a thing about Greenland, and it was called a base century, I believe, and it had to do with from 1958 to 1969, in which they had tried to create this amazing underground tunnels in order to mask what it really was is a missile project to able to get to Russia, put missiles onto Russia. But in the process, they found how difficult it was in order to create all of these tunnels and keep them together, and the ice is constantly moving, and they actually were going to have a nuclear reactor for the power, but they had to close it down after a couple of years. And so it's a fascinating and history of basically of this base. My neighbor, he was stationed there in Greenland at Thule. It was about 100 miles north of Thule, the Air Force Base.
Thank you, Bruce. Interesting. Yeah, so that technology is real. Okay, I like to make connections, unusual connections, and here's one between Greenland and Bob Dylan. So here we go. Put on your seatbelt. The movie, A Complete Unknown. I don't know how many you've seen it. I have. It's wonderful. And in that movie, a lot turns on. This is in the early 60s. Dylan's relationship with this very girl. Susie Rotolo. And this is his album, The Freewheeling, his breakthrough album. And there's a song on there called Bob Dylan's Dream. And where did he get this song? Well, Susie Rotolo took off for Italy. Just as Dylan was becoming famous, she's Italian. Her mother wanted her to follow her dream, which had been in art. And she said, "Okay, Mom, I'll go to Italy for a while." And Dylan was heartbroken. And this is clear in the movie. He eventually finds solace with Joan Baez, but Rotolo returns, and that's in the movie. It's really an interesting triangle. And so while she was in Italy, Dylan thinks, I'll go and visit her in Italy and maybe talk her into coming back. So he's going through Britain. And he meets this a guy named McCarthy, who is into traditional melodies. And Dylan, you see this in the movie. His mind is just an open book, just taking in ideas and churning out songs by the dozen. So he talks to this guy, McCarthy, who says, there's this great 19th century ballad commemorating the death of Sir John Franklin in 1847. And it resulted in Lady Franklin's lament. And that's what became Bob Dylan's dream. And so who was John Franklin, and why was Lady Franklin lamenting? And here's why. Franklin attempted to make a pass through the Northwest Passage from east to west. And he got bogged down. He didn't time it right. And he got caught on King William Island. And his boat was like nuts in a chocolate bar, just caught by the ice, and he couldn't get out, and he died. Here are the tombs of he and his men, and that was Lady Franklin's lament, which became Bob Dylan's dream. There's a similar story in the Antarctic. I don't know how many of you know about Shackleton's trip. It's a wonderful book called The Endurance, and it was made into a great movie that shows the same thing that happened to Shackleton, but he and his men miraculously survived. So what are the top Bob Dylan films? If anybody's interested, I asked GPT to explore. And I've got 5 I'd be willing to share, and how to get them. I'm on Iko and I are on a Dylan film binge. My next door neighbor, his father's a professional musician called Smilin' Jack. And he added a new one that looks intriguing that ChatGPT missed. And it's called Masked and Anonymous. But look at all the people that are starring along Dylan. Dylan is in the movie, but he also wrote it under the pseudonym Sergei Petrov. Go figure. And this is Smilin' Jack next door giving a concert. All right. I've kept Julia waiting too long to get to Junipero Serra. So he's in Monterey. And I thought it's been so long. I look back, and the last year we've only done 4 sessions on California. The last one was last September. And I think, there's a need for a quick review here. So this is where we left off. This is Junipero Serra. He finally makes it to Monterey. after a terrible, terrible time in San Diego. And he delivers a mass that this is a much more verdant and welcoming territory than San Diego. And so he's very grateful. He sings this mass under a live oak tree. And there's the ship out in the Monterey Bay. This live oak tree is still alive. And it's the same oak tree that Sebastian Viscano had celebrated Mass under in 1602, his priest had. And so this is a Catholic landmark. And where is it? It's in the west corner of the cross section of Artillery and Pacific Streets in Monterey. So, and where is that? Here is the peninsula, and it's over in this corner, just at the bottom of Monterey Bay. And here, Serra's landing, Portola landing site. And just to review, Viscano had come up the coast. His path is in black, and had named San Diego. That was his main contribution, to name things, and came up to Monterey Bay and went on further up. He was following Sir Francis Drake, who went up to Drake's Bay at Point Reyes, familiar to all us, and another explorer who was coming from Manila on the way back and just came down the coast, Cermeño. And there's this word that keeps popping up, that Viscano had been in San Diego at and he called it San Diego de Alcala, the feast of San Diego de Alcala. And I keep running into this word. And so I scratch my head, what does that word mean? It refers to a previous saint named Didicus, but he was known as San Diego. Go figure. But if you look up Didicus, you can get the history of how San Diego became a saint. And he lived in Alcala, which is an Arabic word, so inherited from the Moors and their 500 years of civilization in Spain. This is all how he became a saint. He had started off as a missionary in the Canary Islands and had been a strong defender of the indigenous, which is how he became a saint. And to become a saint, you've got to have a miracle, and his miracle involved curing the sick, and in Rome, and then in his friary in Alcala. So that's how this word gets attached to San Diego. If you go down there, you'll see the statue of Junipero Serra de Alcala, and that's what Alcala means. And he got canonized. The other miracle was his body didn't decay. Okay, so this moment in Monterey neatly bisects Serra's biography. So I'm going to use this as just to go and review what we've seen with Serra real quickly for the new people, and review for the old people. But this time through Serra's life, the stakes are higher than when we took our first look at Serra and what are the stakes. And as we go through his life, we might look at the new state law. California students must learn of the mistreatment of Native Americans and the impact of Spanish colonization as well as the gold rush era. And it was presented and sponsored by the only Native American ever elected, and he's an assembly member now, James Ramos from San Bernardino. But at the other extreme, this is the most detailed biography of Junipero Serra, and it's pretty even-handed. Stephen Hackle, being even-handed, even he says, hey, he's a founding father. He's a founding father in spite of the state law, and in spite of the state law, he's a saint. There's steps to becoming a saint, and he was beatified by Pope John Paul in 1988 in Vatican City. Pope John Paul then came to Carmel, to the mission in Carmel. If you haven't been, I recommend it. And then he was sanctified by Pope Francis. And Pope Francis is a pretty good guy, right? And in spite of the name Francis, he is not a Franciscan. He's a Jesuit. So keep that in mind as we go through this time. And he came in 2015, and this is Statuary Hall that we've talked about before, most recently when we looked at Johnny Cash is in this Statuary Hall. Each state gets 2 representatives. And Arkansas has Johnny Cash. Our other representative is Ronald Reagan. And so here is Pope Francis, along with prominent Catholics, politicians in America, including Nancy Pelosi. It was John Boehner, who's a Catholic, and he was the speaker. He invited Pope John Paul. He knew this was coming to a head, and he said, well, why not do it while I'm speaker? And upon finishing, he was the Republican Speaker of the House. He retired because it's really hard to be a Republican Speaker of the House. And this was a great way to go out. The other Catholic standing to the Pope's left is, of course, Joe Biden, and who was vice president at the time. And so when Pope Francis came, he made it clear what Serra had, his take on what Serra had done in California. He said, listen, Serra educated the Native Americans, and he offered them full citizenship. In contrast to England and their treatment of Native Americans on the East Coast at the time that Serra was doing his thing in the 1700s. On the East Coast, the poor Indians were being expelled, which reached a peak with Andrew Jackson, who disobeyed the Supreme Court and marched out the Cherokee on the Trail of Tears. In contrast, I mean, there was plenty of bad things that happened in California, but not nearly as bad as what was happening on the East Coast. To the north, we've talked about how the French were maybe more enlightened. Homer helped us with that. And he pointed out that they were offered full Spanish citizenship if they converted, and they would their souls would be saved. That was the key thing. And Sarah's motivation, I think, you can make up your own mind over that. Now, the promises to turn the land over to the Native Americans was broken, but not by the Spanish. It was by the Mexicans who secularized the church. So that was Pope Francis's argument. As I said earlier, he's not a Franciscan. He is a Jesuit. And they were, at this time, at Serra's time, the Jesuits were far more people of the Enlightenment. Serra, by the time he arrived, the Franciscans had become part of the Inquisition. So just kind of a flip over what you expect. This is how a state chooses a member in a statuary hall. And this is Golden Gate Park before George Floyd and Serra. And after George Floyd, protesters pulling it down, and Kevin McCarthy chided Pelosi for that. There was a suit in Ventura County, and the court ruled that Ventura could take down the statue. And from in front of its building, the church wanted it to stay up. In California, in Sacramento, here's our representative who sponsored the new law, and he was there for an incantation after they removed Sarah's statue from in front of the state capitol. And to boot, they took Columbus Day off the calendar as a judicial holiday and turned it into California Native American Day. It's in September.
Well, John Homer here, the protesters who pulled down the statue of Serra were indiscriminate. They pulled one down of Ulysses Grant in Golden Gate Park as well. I guess he was insufficiently opposed to slavery or something.
Oh, boy. Okay. So onward and forward. This one was repaired at some point. This is another statue of Serra in the Presidio of Monterey, which isn't too far from the Live Oak. And this is Santa Barbara. And you notice his arms around an indigenous child. And the indigenous child is facing away from him, which is different than other statues where the indigenous child is facing Serra. And so a lot of statues have come down. This is the one at San Juan Capistrano that was moved inside. And what's the significance of the child facing the priest? One person suggested the theme of encounter and influence, maybe even resistance, which I think is a bit of a stretch. But they solved it by putting it inside so that Catholics can visit it safely. This is a quite ugly statue of Serra that overlooks Highway 280 outside of Hillsborough. And he was given a bloody finger.
Do you know, John, the name of that statue among the locals? Because my folks live nearby, is Dopey's Grave.
Dopey's grave. Okay.
It's a bad statue.
And yes, it is. Brutalist, I think, is the term. And then we've talked about the saint next door in Arizona. He's not quite a saint, almost. And his 7 statues in Arizona and Sonora have not been defaced. Not. So what did he do different? Um, uh, he was a Jesuit, and the Jesuits, they're part of their philosophy is to go along with the folkways and work with the people. And I think we've talked about the movie, the Mission, which is a great example of that from a couple of hundred years earlier, and in South America. So he's off to a start. He's been declared venerable, Kino has. And so he's on the path to beatification and then canonization. Those are the four stages of Kino. And he's also in Statuary Hall representing Arizona. Interestingly, he's from Tyrol in Italy. A part of Tyrol is in Austria, but he was from the part that's in Italy. And he was appreciated for his understanding of animal husbandry and farming, and contributed a lot to Sonoran economy. And he was not associated with the Inquisition at all. So the influences on Serra, he was born in Mallorca, in the center in a town called Petro. So Mallorca is here. This is Sardinia and Sicily. And there's a Minorca, which I think is here. I'm not sure which one's Minorca, if anybody knows. And so this is Mallorca was important because traditionally they were churning out Franciscans, missionaries. And so when we read about the conversion of the Native Americans in Mexico and Baja California and Upper California, Alta California, we keep running into Mallorcans. And there were 128 of them that all went to the same divinity school in Mexico City, and as a staging ground before they spread out north to Christianize. And they were quite successful. So Francis, we're all familiar with the myth of Saint Francis and Giotto's painting showing his humility by shedding his clothes for the poor, and the Pope holding up a garment. His father saying, "What are you doing? Put your clothes back on." It's interesting. He was initially persecuted, but by the time Sierra's a Franciscan, the Franciscans have become the persecutors. And as we will see, Serra spent 9 years part-time as a persecutor in Mexico City. We'll get there. Giotto again preaching to the animals. Women, big influence on Junipero Serra. Of course, originally is Clare of Assisi, a contemporary of St. Francis. And she started a companion movement, the Poor Clares. I thought this was a kind of a bizarre fact. She's the saint of TV. Go here. And then there's Teresa of Avila, 1580s, and a mystic under suspicion by the Inquisition. She was probably Jewish and was a secret conversion at the time of when the Moors left. Mystic, love alone, the arts. These are the influences on Junipero Serra. And this is the biggest influence of all. So she's 80 years after Teresa. Mary of Jesus Agreda. And she's also a mystic, but she was plugged in and had correspondence with the King of Spain. But her important thing is this notion of bilocation, that she imagined that in her dreams she converted Native Americans, quite specifically in Texas. The lady in blue for her Carmelite habit, and she also has been called the Flying Nun. And so she's also of the Poor Clares. And the claim is that she bilocated over 500 times to the Germano Indians in Texas. And they've gone and asked Indians of the time, and there is a tradition there of some woman in blue. Other non-Christians, I'm talking about, we're talking about Serra and what were the beliefs in the air at the time Serra was there. And if we're going to judge Serra, we have to imagine that this mysticism and bilocalism was a belief, and not just a belief, it was an inspiration. And it was one of the reasons Mary of Agreda was one of the reasons that Serra picked up sticks and went to the New World. He was inspired by him. There are other people who claim bilocalism, Pythagoras at one extreme and Jane Stanford at the other. But Muhammad had a famous dream. He never physically went to Jerusalem ever, but he dreamed that he'd been in Jerusalem. Jewish mystics, of course, the Eastern religions as well. The other tradition is the self-mortification. And when you go to the mission in Carmel, there's evidence of that Junipero Serra practiced self-mortification. And why? People thought they had to do penance, that they were sinners, that Jesus suffered, we should also suffer as well. And so they would cut themselves, they would beat themselves. And this St. Francis Solano, also known as the Apostle of Peru, stuck a cactus in his body. And he's just one of, I'd say, a handful of models of self-mortification that Junipero Serra had, and he practiced it. So it was mainstream almost at his time. And so St. Francis Solano, that name is familiar to us because there's a local connection I'll get to in just a second. But in Serra's lifetime, he sought pain. So upon arriving in Mexico, he walked all the way from Veracruz to Mexico City, suffered either an insect bite or a snake bite that became infected and stayed with him his whole life. So the physicians of us that have treated persistent leg ulcers know how they can fester, and they're very hard to get rid of. So what else did Serra do besides not treat his leg wound? He would, in public, beat himself with a change. He would beat his breast with a stone. The cross itself. He subjected his body to lighted candles. He slept on a hard bed made of hard wood. And the other thing, he used this attitude on himself as an excuse that he should be able to punish Native Americans, the Indians, with blows, because he beat up on himself. Here's the thing. There was no tradition of this among the native Indians, and they did not use capital punishment on their kids. So this was not in keeping with the folkways, which the Jesuits were big on, but the Franciscans were not. This whole movement of self-mortification was quite common in the 14th century, started in the 14th century, and was still going on by the 18th century. And it was quite often a response to war, famine, and plague. What can we do? We deserve this. Let's suffer to chase away the bad demons. And even today, you have these fraternities of penitents, especially in the Pecos Mountains of New Mexico, where they have a crucifixion every Easter, a pseudo crucifixion, not a real one. And so this whole idea of suffering and then ecstasy and apocalyptic timetables. China, the Falun Gong, which the communists are so afraid of, because many Chinese dynasties have fallen from religious movements that just take off. And the Falun Gong, by the way, sponsored this show, the Shen Yun show, which you see advertised all the time. That's Falun Gong. That's Falun Gong. Islam itself, the Shias have this history of self-flagellation in the same way that Christians try to emulate Jesus. Although there's no example of Muhammad ever doing this. And so it's got, for the Shia, it's got to be public, and it establishes a deep bond. So you have these fraternities, Muslim fraternities, and they like the vulnerability of it and the affirmational part of it. Yeah, Aiko.
Jane,
Yes. Yeah, we have friends that witnessed this. Yeah, the Shia. There's a particular holiday, I forget the name of it, where the Shias whip themselves bloody. And Aiko's friend Jeannie showed us photos of it. Quite.
You know,
No, I don't think so. No, not that I know of. So St. Francis of Solano, here's the Bay Area connection I was promising. He's the saint of the mission just across the straits in Sonoma. And he is the patron saint of the very last of Serra's missions. It was established way after Serra had died, about 30 years after Serra had died. But it was established north and because of the Russians. So the Russians were coming down, and that's a theme we'll be taking up in just a second. The Russians were coming down, and this mission was put over North Bay as a bulwark against the Russians. You can go there. There's a museum. There's a commemorative wall. It had spent years, decades in private hands, but was repurchased and restored later. It's the only mission that was built after Mexico had taken over the mission system. And it was, as I said, built mainly because the Mexican governor of California was worried about the Russians. The friar at Mission Dolores asked to be transferred there because he wanted a better climate. Also, he thought that he was going to find more Native Americans eager for conversion. Okay. And now it's a state historic park, so you can go there. So those were the influences on Serra, and we got to realize that's the environment he grew up in. So let's go back to him himself. This is in Petra, right in the middle of Mallorca. And his family had a humble house only a block from the Franciscan friary. So it was destiny for him. He grew up basically in the friary, singing and chanting. And these are the statues of Serra, first in Petra and then in Palma, which was the main city where he went to school. So he went to school and he stayed on faculty, and he rose to the very top of the Franciscan order. He was set for life, tenure, the whole thing. And this is when his influences started pulling him to leave the comfort of this Mediterranean paradise and go to the New World to convert souls. So he and his buddy arrive in the New World, and they, as I said earlier, they walk to Mexico City, striving for purity and to emulate St. Francis. His buddy is Francisco Palou, 10 years younger than he. He had been a student, a mentee of Junipero Serra, and also a Mallorcan, also from Petra. And he became the historian and Serra's biographer. This is his biography of Serra. And so Serra went to Carmel. He volunteered to go to San Francisco. Remember, at the very beginning, when Serra is there, they didn't even know San Francisco existed. But eventually, Palu winds up at Mission Dolores. He had come back with the De Anza expedition. And remember, there's no expedition to San Francisco yet, right? We're just in Monterey. And it's never going to be Serra. It's going to be De Anza, who Serra had confirmed with and said, yeah, go to that fabled Bay Area and do your thing. But when you come, bring a lot of families with you. I'm here. I'm stuck with just priests and soldiers, and the soldiers are constantly accosting the women. The Native Americans think we're widows because we don't have any women. So when you come, De Anza, bring a lot of women, and that'll be our next endeavor. We're talking about De Anza. And so Palu is available in San Francisco, and when word comes that Serra is about ready to die in 1784, Palu goes down and gives him last rites. So I think that's probably a pretty good place to stop. We'll talk next time about what happens with Serra and Palu once they get to Mexico City. And I hope race off to the punchline. Okay, so any questions?
Well, not a question, but a comment. You mentioned earlier the Franklin expedition to the Arctic. And there's a current very popular book called The Ministry of Time. It's a time travel science fiction book in which the British have brought back figures from the past into the present. And one of them they bring into the present is Graham Gore, lieutenant with Franklin, who died, in the Arctic. But now here he is, brought back to late 21st century England in a dystopian future. It's unusual and a lot of fun to read, called The Ministry of Time. And Gore is a charismatic figure.
Okay. Thank you. Ministry of Time.
John?
By the way, John, just as an aside too, we're in the process now of reading A Walk in the Park. Have you read that book?
Amen.
It's it's about a guy walking on the it has to do with the Grand Canyon, and he's been on the Grand Canyon in the dories, and then now he's basically walking, and you walk on the rim. So in a sense, it's I think that it's 300 miles from probably Glen Canyon down to the out wherever before you get to Hoover Dam, I guess. And but he's then if you go around, it's 12 or maybe 1,600 miles if you walk all of the various pathways around the canyons from the rim. And so it's the book is called The Walk in the Park.
Interesting.
Yeah, because you were down there, right? With obviously.
Yeah, we were like 75 miles east of the Grand Canyon on a little place called Tuba City, and it's quite near the Little Colorado River. So people don't realize the big Colorado comes through, and it's formidable canyon. But if you follow the Little Colorado down, which the Hopi did as part of
Hopi did, right?
as part of their religious pilgrimage. You just follow the Little Colorado down. It takes you longer, but you get down to the bottom, and that's where they and the Navajo believe that they came out of a hole in the ground. This is their origination story. And it was precisely at a mineral-rich hot spring, and there's so many minerals in it. There's this yellow rim around it, halo, which makes it even seem more sacred. And the Hopis had a practical reason, though, for going down. It was to get salt. Because the ebb and flow of the Colorado left evaporated pools of salt. So it was religious, but also a very practical pilgrimage.
One of the things that he does mention is that there are essentially handprints that were left on the rim of the canyon. So this is up at the top, and that he was one of the things is how you can basically leap from one side of the crevice to another, and that basically the Hopi probably were doing that at one point, and because they're up on there's the evidence of the handprints, which have been around for lots and lots of years.
Yeah, and petroglyphs. It's easy to find the petroglyphs in the writings, and yeah.
Didn't you comment about at one point in time a year or so ago when you were going up, and that the Hopi basically did not show the Spanish explorers the maiden Colorado. I mean, but not the little one.
Yeah, well, that was way back when we were talking about Coronado in 15 and 15. And that's exactly right. They showed them the rim and looking down at the mighty Colorado Grand Canyon, and they said, "Yeah, it's impossible to get down there. Sorry." You got a good memory, Bruce.
Well, let's see. Yeah, I can't remember what I did yesterday, but
they're the important things.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
All right.
Great
Thank
day.
you, John.
Great lecture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Sure.
Bye, John.
Let's
So
see.
much knowledge.